What is good, guys? It's Ray J back with another video. And in this one, I wanted to break down what's going on with the overall market, what you should be watching for as time progresses. I'm going to be talking about what's going on with Tesla, what the news is saying about it, what's happening with Nvda, SPY, the QQQ, and a couple of other tickers, what you should be watching for as time progresses. But before I break anything down, all this information, before I get into any more details, let me just mention a couple of things. I am personally not a financial planner, so take nothing I say as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out the Moomoo link, which is down below and in the description. If you sign up for Moomoo, the link down below and deposit $100 into the account, you are guaranteed up to 5 free stocks. If you put in $1,000, you're guaranteed up to 15 free stocks, and the offer ends in just 9 days. So anyways, let's break down what's going on with Tesla in the markets. Tesla is showing some relative weakness because Tesla closed down 0.31%, whereas SPY managed to close in the green, and so did the Nasdaq and the QQQ and other tickers out there. Now, the market, in my opinion, has started to flip a little bit, and there is some potential for a bit more upside. However, I want to warn you all that upside is likely going to be limited. I don't think it's going to be extremely massive or like super comparable to what we saw last week. And I think that if there is a bit more upside, this could help Tesla pop just a tiny bit more. But we're likely going to see a lot of range-bound price action after that, and we're approaching some very critical resistance on SPY and the QQQ and etc. And following this little pop that could be coming, whether it's just range-bound or not, I think there's going to be downside even later than that. So I'm going to break down why that is. I'm going to make this very simple to understand and what's going on with the markets for now. But first, let's talk about some news and something very big happening to the markets. So I want to warn everyone that on a Wednesday, right, 2 days from now, we have Wednesday, Jerome Powell is going to be giving a speech at 10:15 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's going to be on Wednesday. Before Powell comes on, before he ends up giving his little speech causing the market to move, most likely it will. Before that happens, for Tuesday, which is tomorrow, we have a bunch of Fed speakers coming. They're going to continue to give lots and lots of speeches. We have Barr, Jefferson, Waller, Williams, Logan, and all these other Fed speakers all speaking. It's going to happen like every couple of hours. So this could affect the market to some extent. And the two main pieces of data for tomorrow are going to be at 11 o'clock a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We have the economic optimism report. And then around noon, we have the total household debt for Q3 report coming out. So this might cause some volatility between 11 o'clock a.m. and noon for tomorrow. Besides that, I think the bigger move is going to come by Wednesday when Jerome Powell gives his speech. He could still shake the markets, guys. You've got to be prepared, and we'll see what he ends up saying. So I want to be prepared for that. We'll see what happens, but technicals are telling a different story. Now, when it comes to the market right now, the Nasdaq is closed higher for Monday. Right now, we're at the longest winning streak since January. It's very interesting to witness. But I want to warn you all that there will be a pullback likely coming soon. We might not be ready just yet for it because the market could pop a bit more. But I think the market's going to be range bound. We're going to see a lot of choppy price action very soon. And eventually, we're going to see that pullback, a very healthy style pullback, not a massive crash, not a huge correction, just a minor pullback, which is going to be very healthy, before even more upside for the end of the year later on. So I will talk more about that later on. When it comes to Tesla, there's some news coming out that there's a muddy Tesla Cybertruck duo that was actually in the Tahoe National Forest. That's very awesome because you could see that there's a lot of exposure for Tesla, and we're seeing a lot of capabilities of the Cybertruck. We could see that this could go off-roading and doing some really cool stuff. In my opinion, it's very cool, and they're designed for different terrains and things like that. They've been tested through them, so it's very cool to see. And this makes me more excited for the Tesla Cybertruck event coming out over the next couple of weeks. That's going to be very fun as well. Good news when it comes to other things coming out for the markets. On Tuesday, we have Uber and Rivian announcing their earnings. Uber is going to be before the market opens, and then after market close, we have Rivian. Then for Wednesday, we have Roblox in the morning alongside AMC and Walt Disney during the after hours during that time frame. Disney is going to be the biggest one for the day on Wednesday, so make sure you're ready for that. And that's pretty much like it for earnings. There's nothing else that's too crazy. Some more news came out that Lucid has announced that's going to be adopting the Tesla NACS charger starting in 2025. That's a great news for them, and the list just goes on, giving Tesla more control and more power as time goes on. Elon Musk put this on his Twitter, so I just wanted to call that out. And now when it comes to Tesla, we have some more data that has come out. Nothing has changed when it comes to analyst ratings. Most of them are giving Tesla overweight ratings, but the price price ratio is declining a bit, meaning Tesla's losing some strength and Tesla's becoming a bit weaker for now. On top of this, when it comes to seasonality, we tend to see Tesla slow down a little bit during the month of October and even for parts of November. But for most of November, especially approaching the end of the month, thanks to the Cybertruck and etc., Tesla tends to be bullish. You can see that November tends to be stronger. We're green about 64% of the time. So my gut is telling me, even though Tesla's weak right now, it's a little bit weaker than the markets. Tesla could remain weak for an extended period of time, but as we approach the second half of November, I think we're going to see some more upside for Tesla approaching the big events. And I think we're getting ready for some nice moves. So I will talk more about that in just a few minutes. Don't forget that Tuesdays tend to be green only about historically 51% of the time. So it tends to be kind of flat. And we see more volatility during now the third to fourth hours of the trading day, so around 11 to 12 p.m. And finally, around 2 o'clock p.m., Tesla tends to be more volatile. And that's it for data for now. It has very strong financial estimates, and there's not anything too crazy in the news. Volume was 117 million, very flat. So now the question is, what is Tesla going to do? Well, honestly, guys, like I said before, Nvda, the QQQ, Aapl, and SPY look like they may see a little bit more upside, a little bit of upside before these things start to trade sideways in their ranges and then they start to decline very soon. I think there's going to be a pullback coming soon, but before that happens, the market could go a little bit higher. And the problem is Tesla's looking a bit weaker as we have a possible head and shoulders developing with this double top like pattern. So I think we might pop in the morning with the market, but if we get some kind of bad piece of news, Tesla could decline. Now, don't forget, when you look at Tesla, especially on the daily time frame, Tesla has this big gap down here. We have this big gap down to 205. We could fill the gap, but even if we do end up filling it, Tesla could also be forming a nice inverse head and shoulders in the process. So looking at the chart, we happen to have this on the daily time frame. We have this nice left shoulder here, a head developing here, and we could come down to form a right shoulder to fill this gap. And then it could always bounce later on approaching the Cybertruck events to try to fill this gap. So my guts is telling me that's likely what's going to happen. But we have to see if Tesla breaks critical support to get confirmation. That's why I'm going to break down these levels on Tesla. So for tomorrow, Tesla's looking a little weaker right now compared to the market, but there's no confirmed break to the downside yet. A big break. If Tesla loses 215 to 214, I would say like 214 going into tomorrow, I'm going to turn bearish and I think it's going to start sinking a lot more. If we manage to hold above this, because today we came down, but we saw buyers defend it. If Tesla holds above this for an extended period of time, it may take a little longer for this thing to actually decline before we get that bounce. So we're going to be watching to see if Tesla remains range bound or if Tesla ends up getting the bounce. Watch support at 214 to 215, 216.8, and then watch resistance at 220 and then 222.5. I'm thinking, and this is what my prediction would be. First off, you want to be watching these levels just to be prepared for anything, but I think that Tesla may pop a little bit and it's eventually going to get a break to the downside back down to this 214 to 215 area. And I think that whether it's after Jerome Powell's speech or sometime in the future, maybe as soon as tomorrow, depending on the news, in the near-term future, over the next week, I think Tesla's going to break this support right here. It's looking kind of weak right now. We have a head and shoulders like pattern. And I think Tesla's going to come down all the way back down to 212. And if we lose 212, it's going to come down to 210. We have 208 and 205 coming. I think if 212 breaks, it's likely going to come all the way down to 205 very soon anyways. So I anticipate some downside is coming soon. Before the downside comes, we might see Tesla try to pop back to 220, trade kind of sideways and range bound a bit before we end up breaking down to form this head and shoulders. And that's basically the direction I'm leaning in. Now, it is possible that the market could try to, help Tesla to some extent, but I'm leaning in the direction of Tesla declining back down to these lower 200s soon. But it might bounce later on thanks to the inverse head and shoulders that's forming. So it could always rebound later on during the month. For now, it might decline a bit, then bounce as time goes on. I find that to be the most likely possibility. Now, when it comes to SPY, I want to call out something a little different from Tesla. SPY happens to have a bullish wedge that's developing. So it might get a little pop tomorrow. It might try to push up back. And we're going to see if it can break 436 or not. But watch 437 and 438 to 438.5 as resistances. It may pop a little bit, and then we might see some sideways price action up here. I think it's going to be range bound between 436 to 438. It may pop a bit and just trade sideways. And then later on, I think it's going to decline and start filling some of these gaps and making its way back down to 430. So do I think it's going to decline? The answer is yes. Eventually, it's going to decline. Before we end up declining, this thing might pop a little bit more and just trade sideways for an extended period of time before we get the decline. And we'll be watching to see if Jerome Powell causes it or not, if something else happens. We'll just have to wait and see. For support, watch this trend line right here. You can draw out a trend line connecting these support levels. Watch this trend line. If we lose this, I expect it to retest 433.5, and we're seeing buyers trying to defend it. If you truly want to be bearish on SPY, we need to see it break and hold and maybe close below 433, and that's when it's going to start declining. We want to be watching that very carefully. If we're bullish on SPY, you want to see this thing break and hold 436.5. If we do so, it could get very close to 438 before we see the decline. So those are some levels to watch for. What do I think SPY is going to do? My answer is I think it's going to pop a little bit. It's going to try to hold up for an extended period of time. It's going to be range bound, going back and forth to start off tomorrow. And then either by the end of the day, or if not by the next couple of days, we're going to see the decline happen. It may be a bit delayed because of Jerome Powell's speech on Wednesday. The market may just wait some time before it ends up getting the decline. So we'll be watching for that very carefully. So that's what I'm seeing on SPY so far. Another reason why I'm saying that about SPY and also the QQQ later is because on Aapl has a potential rising wedge-like pattern developing, but here's the thing about Aapl. We're not necessarily breaking down yet, and Aapl is still on a nice uptrend, and we could see this thing continue to push before this thing ends up breaking. So watch and see if this thing breaks or not. If we lose 178, that's when you turn bearish, and that's going to drag the market down. But Aapl looks like it's trying to hold up, and it could retest 180, maybe a little bit higher. It could maintain this rising wedge for an extended period of time before this thing starts breaking down. So that means the market may pop a little bit more, trade sideways, then start declining over the next couple of trading days, over the next week or so. So that's what I'm leaning towards on Aapl and the other stocks out there. So look for a little more popping sideways price action and a decline to come later on. And I think that's very probable. And I think that's what's likely going to be the case for QQQ as well. So on the triple Q, especially look at the bigger time frames, the daily is not looking that bad. Same thing with SPY. Daily looks like it might try to continue a bit higher before we form our top and we see the market decline a bit. On the QQQ, I think something very similar is developing. Now we're approaching some critical resistance, very close to 370. Also at 371 and then 372.5 is where we've seen some rejections historically. Let me just show you on this chart. So because we have this bullish wedge developing, we're going to be watching basically 370 as resistance. If we get above this, watch 370.5, then 371, and then 372.5. Somewhere here, I believe it's going to top. We're going to find our top, and this thing is going to start rejecting. It's getting very close. We're not that far from those levels, and I think that we're in a topping process just temporarily for a temporary pullback, which is going to be completely healthy, completely normal, not necessarily a big correction. So the QQQ could pump a little bit higher, just a little bit more, get very close to this 370 area, maybe hit the low 370s. I'm not 100% sure how high it's going to go, but soon it's going to top, start trading sideways, and eventually start declining over the next few days. I think that's likely going to happen. I think that this is going to be heavily dictated by external factors coming out for the markets. For Nvda stock, this thing also has a potential bullish wedge developing. We're going to be watching the support at the trend line. If we lose this 455 area, watch this 452.5 area, then there's 450 below that. We did come down to fill the gap as I was predicting, but the market got bought right back up, including Nvda. So we did get the move I was calling out, but it came right back up. So the buyers are still defending. So if we end up losing 450, that's when you're going to turn bearish. If we have to close below that, that's when we can see like 448, 444, and like 442. We're not there yet. We're getting closer, but we're not there yet. I think that when you look at historical resistance, we have a tight resistance between 460 and 462.5. So I think Nvda could go a little bit higher, just go a little bit higher, then we're going to see some sideways price action in the lower 460s. And then we're eventually going to see this thing break down, but it just needs a little bit more time before that ends up happening. For Aapl stock, we're going to be watching even more resistance off this like rising wedge. So make sure you watch how this affects Nvda and other factors like that. All right, guys, so that's it for the main 5. Now I'm just going to be very brief with the rest of these. Some stocks are looking like they're ready to decline. Other ones are not looking as ready. The IWM on the daily chart has a gap to fill. Look for a little pop and drop. It may pop a bit to backtest like 173.5, then reject and come down to fill the gap towards 169. This looks a little bit weaker than SPY, so the Russell 2000, like some smaller caps, could look a bit weaker. Microsoft looks like it could get very close to its resistance, very close to this 360 area. So it could pop a little bit more before we get this rejection. So watch that very carefully. It's not looking like it's ready to reject yet. So it could get very close to 360, then reject and make its way back down towards 349. There's a real possibility of that. On AMD, this thing may try to pop a little bit towards this resistance around 115. So it could go a little bit higher with Nvidia, then reject off this level and start slowing down. We have some tight resistance between 113 to 115. It could come down here and then end up rejecting. So if we're ready to reject right now, you want to see this thing break below 110. If that's the case, 107.5 could be coming. Look for a little pop and drop or a drop from here, but I think that's it's going to hold up for some time before it ends up dropping. Jerome Powell could play a big role in how the market moves. The VIX is still looking a bit more bearish, but we're approaching some key support at 14 flat. That's where we've seen this thing bounce quite nicely. So we have support around 13.5 to 14. We might see the VIX drop a little bit more because of the market popping, but then the VIX is eventually going to bounce because the market has a pullback coming. So we're going to be watching these levels very carefully. Same thing on the SQQQ. We're approaching 18. So I think that around this 18 area, we might see this thing bounce. We're very close to it. The market may pop a little bit more, then start to trade sideways and eventually decline. And we're going to see the SQQQ likely drop a little bit more, then bounce and start filling this gap. So I think that that is likely going to be on the cards. The dollar index is also trying to bounce already. So if it starts pushing up for 105.6 plus, if we break this, this could be a bearish signal for the markets in the future. Not quite yet, but in the future. Coinbase looks like it's turning already, so watch for that 83 support, very close to the 5 EMA. If you lose that, watch 80, then 78, but there is a risk of downside for it. On Google, we're looking kind of decent right now, but we're approaching some key resistance. If you want to be bullish, we need to see this thing close above 132.65. If it does so, that's going to be good for the bulls. If it fails to do so, it could decline and come right back down towards 129. My gut tells me it's going to come very close, but then fail and come back down to 129. And it could be forming a cup and handle. This might just be like a cup and handle it's forming before it goes higher later on. So I'm still leaning in that direction. The 10-year treasury yield looks like it might bounce soon. This tells me there's going to be likely downside coming to the market soon. The market may pop a bit first, trade sideways, and then see the downside. So it may be a little delayed, but downside still seems imminent. For Amazon, we're trying to push a little bit more. It looks like it still has more steam left, so it could get very close to the 142.5 area. We have this resistance right here around 142, which is where Amazon rejected off of in the past. And if we try to make our full measured move, I wouldn't rule out the possibility of it getting very close to this gap fill at like 144 and then rejecting. But whether it's 142 or 145, I think Amazon's going to reject off one of those. And I think that there is downside coming soon. Could pop a little bit more, just a few more dollars up, and then it's going to likely see some downside. That's what I'm seeing for Amazon. And for Meta, now we have a potential inverse head and shoulders. This looks like it might try to make its way up towards 325, but we have to break 319 first. If we reject off 319 instead, however, because the daily is looking weak, it might return to 309 and then start declining towards 305. So I'm thinking we're going to be watching to see if we reject off 319. If we reject off a pop, watch it come down to 309 to 305. If we break 319 and get above 320, then we could push for 325 and then reject. My guts tells me that 319 was it, and this thing's going to like pop a bit and start rejecting and come down to 309 from here. But just to be safe, we'll have to wait and see. All right, guys, so that's it for this one. On Tesla, look for a little pop and a drop. It could backtest this like 220 area, then just start downtrending soon. I think we have a gap to fill, but make sure you watch support at that 215 area, and we'll see if Tesla holds. Once again, guys, if Tesla does decline, okay, do not panic. Do not turn into a perma bear. Do not lose your mind over some downside, because we have a possible inverse head and shoulders that could be developing. We have a left shoulder here ahead. The right shoulder could be forming, and Tesla could drop a little bit, fill the gap, get to the very low 200s, then bounce and start pushing thanks to the Cybertruck event over the next couple of weeks. There's a good chance of that happening, so make sure you're prepared for that just to be safe. But just know there might be some short-term downside before some medium-term upside for Tesla. All right, that's what I'm seeing for now for the month of November. It is historically a very strong month for Tesla, so don't lose your mind just yet. We might finish November on a very, very strong note. We may start off a little weak, We started off kind of strong, but we could still have some weakness for now. But we're going to likely finish off much stronger in a much stronger manner. All right, so I hope that's as clear as possible. Have a great day, guys. Remain calm, cool, and collected. Sleep well, do what you have to do, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you, and peace out.